Out of all of Olympus's cameras, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the OM-D E-M10 line. You know, they're attractive little devices, they've got some great features, and they're pretty affordable too. So, updating 2015's OM-D E-M10 Mark II is the Mark III. I'm here today at Hitchin Lavender with Lucy to put it through its paces and see what this thing can do. So this camera has the same micro four thirds sensor that was in the original OM-D E-M10 and the E-M10 Mark II. It's a 16.1 megapixel micro four thirds sensor. It does, however, have a brand new processor. It's got the TruePic VIII processor that was found in the Olympus flagship camera, the OM-D E-M1 Mark II. Now admittedly, that's a pretty reserved pixel count for a new camera, but it still offers more than enough resolution for most people's printing needs. And with a physically smaller sensor than the APS-C likes of Fuji or Sony's full frame models, it's probably a wise choice that has helped Olympus to ensure that solid image quality is maintained rather than sacrificing it all for the sake of a few extra megapixels. Of course, that physically smaller sensor does mean that those professional looking shallow depths of field are a bit harder to achieve in images, but they're still very much possible with the right lens and composition. And for some of the genres that this range is most popular for, like street photography, that's probably not going to be so much of a concern anyway. The Mark III's native ISO range goes from 200 to 6400, while up to 25600 is available as an extended level. This too is the same as the previous two models. But of course that new processor is going to help you to achieve better looking results at slightly higher ISOs. It's also helped enable a faster burst mode, with the camera now allowing up to 8.6 frames per second with the focus locked on the first shot and 4.8 frames per second with continuous autofocus. Now, just like its predecessor, this camera has Olympus's 5-axis image stabilization system, and that can compensate for up to 4 stops of camera shake. It combats pitch, yaw, vertical and horizontal shift, as well as roll by the camera for crisp images. This makes handheld shots at slower shutter speeds much more achievable, and really comes into its own when shooting in lower light levels. This stabilization also works when shooting video, helping you to produce much more usable footage than the trembling clips that are often produced by other systems when handheld. So let's talk a little bit more about video. The big change here is that this camera can now shoot 4K at 25 frames per second. It can also do Full HD at 60 frames per second. And if you go down to a HD mode, there's a super slow motion 120 frames per second. Now that's a first for an E-M10, but it's obviously been seen in Olympus cameras like the E-M1 Mark II before. This camera doesn't have inputs for an external microphone or headphones though, so it's not going to be many photographers' first choice. More of a handy feature to have if you're a stills photographer looking to capture some high quality clips. Now, while the Mark II had an 81-point contrast detect system, this camera now has a 121-point contrast detect autofocus system, and in good light like today, it's been blisteringly fast. The camera has some really useful options too, like face priority, which if it detects a face, will override your selected focus point and focus on that face. If it can detect an eye, it will focus on the near side eye. If you're new to cameras like this, they're going to be really useful features. There's also an autofocus trackpad option, which allows you to use your thumb on the rear screen to move the active focus point with the camera held to the eye. Now, there's not been a whole load of design changes with this camera. If you're in the Mark I or the Mark II, it's going to seem really familiar. It's still pretty compact. It weighs about 410 grams without the lens, 500 grams with the lens, but there have been a few little tweaks and changes made. There's now a deeper grip, which paired with the thumb rest makes this device feel great in the hand. And the old function button on the top left has now been turned into a quick menu button from which you can control most major settings quickly by touch once it's opened up on the back screen. Like the Mark II, this camera has a 2.36 million dot EVF and a tilt and touch rear screen. These are both fairly bright and responsive. They're not going to set the world on fire, but they do the job as well as most rival systems at the same price point. The tilt screen is really useful when taking images from high and low angles. And unlike an optical viewfinder, this EVF shows the user the image that they're going to actually take. So for those who are just making their first move to a dedicated camera, it's arguably going to seem a lot more natural. There's still a pop-up flash on the top of this camera, a power switch on the left side of it, and main setting dials on the right. These are all metal, and the camera feels pretty solid. Of course, this device has Wi-Fi and works with Olympus's Image Share app for remote file transfer and camera control. You can even add GPS information to your file via a smartphone. Many of the shooting modes in this camera have been overhauled. Of course, you've got all your manual settings as standard, but the auto mode has been updated, as have the options available for scene and art filter modes. There's now a backlit HDR option, multi-shot focus and silent shutter options, and that silent option really is quiet. Now, one of the best things about this camera is its micro four thirds mount. With a micro four thirds mount, you've got great access to lenses. There are over 60 different lenses available, and they go all the way from 9mm fisheyes all the way up to 600mm equivalent prime lenses for things like wildlife. Now, that can't be said of all CSC camera systems, so if you're umming and ahhing about what to go for, that's definitely one of the unique selling points of a micro four thirds camera like this. With its refined styling, decent image quality and some advanced features like 4K and 5-axis image stabilization, if you're looking for a camera to move on from a smartphone or from a compact, then this could be the ideal device. For more information about the Olympus OM-D E-M10 Mark III, visit wix.co.uk.